All right, Matt. So we get a lot of YouTube comments that kind of couple you and Peter T in terms of like your views on things. So he recently had a special AMA, episode 329. It's a subscriber only episode, so you'd have to be a paid subscriber to see it.
Which you
What,
should do. I actually, believe it or not, even though Peter and I are friends, I do pay to have
okay.
access. Really, Peter? Come on, you're going to make me. No, I do pay
Yeah.
for access to the subscriber content. So I would recommend it highly.
Can you share your password with me?
Yeah.
uh,
No.
yeah. No, of course not. So his Nick, obviously, that's part of the reason why I'm here is because I'm also named Nick.
Right. That's why we brought you in.
Yeah. His Nick asked him a number of questions, about 4 or 5 or so, and I thought it'd be fun for me to ask you those same questions.
Okay.
Somewhat compare his answers at a high level, but if you want more detail, of course, go check out his full episode.
Yep. Sounds good. And actually, this is good timing because we're going to be going down to visit Peter next month in Austin. And so we're going to do sort of a collaboration where I will be on his podcast and then we'll interview him for our podcast. So keep an eye out for that episode. I'm guessing that'll come out, I don't know, sometime early February or late January. I haven't gotten permission to talk about what we're doing for Peter's podcast yet. So I will just tell you it's something he has never done on his podcast before. So
I'm excited.
Check it out.
That's going to be a lot of fun. So the first one at a high level is, why is grip strength important? Is it a proxy or a biomarker for longevity and health?
Sure. So I guess there's a couple of questions underneath that. Like one is, like you said, why is it important? Is it a biomarker for health outcomes, mortality? The answer there is clearly yes, meaning that many studies have shown that there's a correlation between greater grip strength and improved health outcomes, reduced risk of dying. I think the sort of underlying question is that causal? In other words, do you need to have a strong grip strength to have those benefits? And should you train grip strength specifically to achieve those benefits? So I think, the honest answer is we don't know whether specifically training grip strength will give you health benefits. My intuition is the answer there is probably no. In other words, I don't think, sitting there with a gripper multiple hours each day is going to confer health benefits in and of itself. I think it probably is more that grip strength reflects sort of overall muscle function, and people who do resistance training regularly are more likely to have higher grip strength, or people who have jobs where they carry a lot of weight routinely are more likely to have higher grip strength. So I think it's probably more a reflection of underlying muscle function, muscle mass, than it is that grip strength is directly causal for any beneficial health outcomes. And I guess the last thing I'd say on that is I don't specifically train for grip strength myself. I've learned, because we've measured it now a few times, once with Mike Mutzel when we were actually at his house, that I've got a pretty good grip strength just based on percentiles, but that's not because I trained specifically for grip strength. It's because I do regular resistance training.
Okay, I think you guys are pretty aligned there. He also talks about not using the squeezers. So, but when you're designing a workout, you don't purposely say, okay, I'm going to do pull-ups or farmer's walk in order to increase my carrying capacity.
No, I don't. I think those are both good exercises. I don't typically do farmer's walk. I think pull-ups are a great exercise, but I don't ever intentionally train for grip strength.
Okay, but you do a lot of deadlifts, so you get it kind of through deadlifts.
Yeah, it's all indirect. Again, but that aligns with my belief. And again, we don't know for sure, but I think it's pretty reasonable to think that grip strength is reflecting underlying muscle function, and that grip strength itself is not a direct causal factor for health outcomes.
One thought I had is there's a lot of literature on it. Is that just because it's really easy to test?
Yeah, exactly.
A $20 device.
Totally. If you think about how clinical trials are done, you often need to be pragmatic in what you measure. And so if you're looking at muscle function and you want to measure it across a large population of people, particularly elderly people, it's way easier to measure grip strength than it is to measure, bench press or ability to squat, right? Especially in elderly people. Yeah. So it's totally because it's an easy, relatively non-invasive, you're not going to hurt anybody measuring grip strength. It's the same reason they do a sit-stand test or a 6-minute walk, right? It's just easy to measure. Those things don't necessarily imply causality for the outcomes that you're correlating them with.
All right. Yep. So one of my favorite grip strength exercises is definitely pull-ups. why I like them is you kind of have to have full shoulder range of motion and mobility. You have to have good grip strength, of course. And then there's an incentive to weigh less. Because when I weighed 250, I was worse at
Well,
pull-ups than I
you
weighed
could
200.
also look at it as if you weigh more, you're like building your strength more,
Building my muscle,
right?
yeah,
So, I
for
mean,
sure.
I'm joking, but I totally agree with you about pull-ups. I think I used to hate pull-ups, but it's now one of my favorite exercises. And in particular, doing full range of motion pull-ups and making sure you stop for a second at the bottom makes it way harder.
Way harder, yeah.
Way harder. But I think that's one of the best exercises you can do. Again, I'm not doing it for grip strength, but that's a side effect of doing pull-ups is you're going to strengthen your grip strength.
Cool. So you and I are both traveling next month to Austin to visit Peter. And on this AMA, he talked about how he likes to work out and his strategies behind working out while traveling. I was wondering, do you have any similar strategies when you travel?
I travel a lot, less now than I used to, but still probably more than is optimal. But I love to travel too. Like I think a lot of people love to travel. There are lots of good things about traveling. It does absolutely make it harder to keep with your routine, not just for exercise, diet too. For exercise in particular, I mean, I think the sort of big picture approach that I take is try to stay somewhere where they've got a reasonable gym, right? So, most of the time, unless you're staying at really high-end places or you have access to fancy gyms when you're traveling, probably the best you're going to get is dumbbells up to 50 and maybe a couple of universal machines. And that's pretty good. Like my experience is most of the places I've stayed don't even have that. So try to find a place where you have sort of minimal weights, and then usually there's going to be some cardio equipment. And really, I think I'm not super great at keeping my regular workout schedule as much as I have a regular workout schedule when I'm traveling, but I really try to carve out time, at least every other day, to get in and do some sort of resistance training. Usually when I'm traveling, I like to walk as much as possible. So I usually don't do a lot of dedicated cardio when I'm traveling, but I do try to at least keep some sort of minimal resistance training every other day or every third day, given whatever equipment's available. So I'm not great at it, I guess I would say. But I think that's kind of the minimal effort. And then the other thing you can do, of course, is body weight exercises. And anybody can do that pretty much in your hotel room.
Yeah, a couple of follow-ups. One is I think the shutdowns during COVID really taught me that it doesn't take that much to maintain or build muscle, dumbbells, gymnastics rings, whatever. The other one with Peter is you made it seem like the goal of exercise while traveling should be to maintain muscle or, mitigate loss. Do you think you're going to lose muscle if you travel, a few times through the year?
I mean, I think obviously it depends on how long your trip is. Like if you're talking an extended trip, 3 weeks, and you don't do any sort of resistance training for that period of time, yeah, I think that's probably net detrimental to your overall muscle health and muscle function. A couple of days, no. In fact, I mean, I think, one of the things that I've realized, I think a lot of people, and I probably fell into this trap as well, tend to overtrain. And I think there's actually a lot of benefits to taking, at least a couple of days and sometimes deloading maybe for an entire week or not even lifting weight for an entire week, maybe once a year. I think there's a lot of benefits in terms of recovery and then coming back stronger. So I don't think you need to worry about losing muscle mass if you don't do any weightlifting or body weight exercises for a few days. Again, if we get into the period of more than a week, yeah, but even there, it's going to be very dependent on the person. I think that it's unlikely you're going to have substantial loss of strength, loss of muscle mass, even in 2 weeks without lifting weights. So I wouldn't be too worried about losing muscle mass. Again, that's making assumptions that you aren't just laying in bed all day. Like, yes, if you're completely, sedentary, it doesn't take very long to lose muscle mass. But as long as you're going about your daily business, taking the stairs, carrying stuff, I don't think you have to worry too much about it over a period of a few days.
Completely agree. A lot of context. If you know you have a family vacation coming up, you could train hard going up to it and then use that vacation as a forced deload.
Yeah.
Or being sick sometimes is a forced deload as well.
Yep.
Okay, so the next one that Nick asked Peter was, what are your top 5 most important biomarkers for assessing health? And this one,
What a bullshit question.
Well, I think Peter agreed and he pushed back, and I'm sure he ended up getting to like 7 or 8. He negotiated.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
What are your top 5? You have?
I guess I'm going to try to cheat first and say, I guess the way I would first think about this is sort of in terms of systems. And then we could ask which biomarker within each system is most relevant. So, I mean, I think body composition for sure. So maybe if we're talking diagnostics, I'd think about DEXA.
Interesting.
Some measure of body composition or strength. Hormones, I think, are really important and underappreciated in middle-aged to older adults, um, even young adults sometimes. Metabolic health, probably lipids. You need some way to assess cardiovascular. I don't know that I can get more specific than that. This is really tricky, but I would think about it in that way. I don't think this is a good question.
Interesting. Would it be helpful if I named his? Again, not go into the details, but just at a high level, his 5,
Yeah.
and then we can kind of see how it compares. So he says, so 1 and 2 were ApoB and LP(a).
So
which
cardiovascular, yeah.
Had you measured. Number 3 was ApoE. So for...
I don't think I would put that on my list. That wouldn't even, if I had to like get to like 10 specific things to measure, I don't think I would put ApoE not because I don't think it's relevant, but because while it's actionable, the action that you would take is the same thing that we tell everybody in terms of lifestyle modification, right?
Yeah.
So I think knowing that you are at higher risk because of your ApoE variant may give people more motivation for lifestyle, to improve lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody should be doing that. So it doesn't actually change the recommendation. It may change the person's approach to lifestyle, but it doesn't change the actionable recommendation in any way that I'm aware of. And what I mean by that is I can't think of anything that you would specifically say to a 4-4 person that they should do that somebody who has the 3-3 variant shouldn't do.
Do you know your
that
status?
Makes sense?
We talked about it?
Yeah, I'm 3-3.
3-3. Okay, so I have 1 ApoE4, and I've actually used it as an excuse not to drink alcohol at parties. They don't know what I'm talking about, but it works.
Yeah, right. So you can you can say I have a genetic predisposition that puts me at higher risk for dementia, and so I don't drink alcohol. Yeah, sure.
There we go.
Yeah, so, I mean, so again, I think it's maybe a useful biomarker from the perspective of motivating people, but it's not a useful biomarker in terms of what you would actually recommend that people do. As far as I know, maybe there's something I'm not aware of there, but as far as I know, there is no actionable difference.
We have a mutual friend who I won't name, but they have 2 ApoE4s, and it just motivates the hell out of them to like have the craziest, cleanest diet you've ever
And I
heard
think
of.
you can always point to people like that. I'm sure there are people on the other side where it causes them to spiral downward when they find out.
What's the point? Yeah. Okay. So the next one's the OGTT test. I forget what's that.
Oh yeah, metabolic health, oral glucose tolerance test.
What it is, yeah.
So again, that fits with what I said about metabolic health. OGTT, good test. Actually, 2 biomarkers there if we're being literal, but yeah, I think that's a good thing to do, and it is probably a pretty reasonable. That's probably the best you can do for one test for getting just a snapshot of overall current metabolic health and risk of metabolic disease. And I think we've alluded to this before. You know, a lot of people maybe don't have access to OGTT because you have to go into a clinic and do that. I think you can get pretty much the same information from continuous glucose monitoring if you know what you're doing and how to read the CGM data. And you can do essentially your own home OGTT test. You won't get the insulin part, but you'll get the glucose part wearing a CGM. And I think one of the things that we've talked about is jelly beans. It doesn't have to be jelly beans. It's just that with jelly beans, you can get a specific amount of glucose in a sort of immediate time frame, and then just look at your glucose curve over the next 2 to 3 hours. I think that's pretty good. So if you don't have access to an OGTT, you can get almost the same information from continuous glucose monitoring, which now is direct to consumer.
Yeah.
So again, I have mixed feelings about direct to consumer CGM, but anybody can get access to it these days.
Okay, so on the hierarchy of like insulin sensitivity, fasting glucose would be the lowest. I'm guessing then A1C. And then where would you put OGTT or CGM in terms of which one would you recommend someone do?
Well, I think it depends on your level of confidence and competence in understanding what you're seeing with a CGM. So, I mean, I think OGTT is going to be the best because you'll get both glucose and insulin. The place where a CGM has a leg up on OGTT, so OGTT, you're going to have to go into the clinic, right? And they're going to take blood every half an hour, probably. So the place where CGM has a leg up on that is you'll get continuous readings, every 5 or so minutes over the entire period of the glucose spike. The thing you don't get from CGM is the insulin measurements, which are informative. So I think for most people, just seeing the shape of the glucose spike probably gives enough information. But for some people, knowing what happens to insulin and what the kinetics of the insulin response are can give additional information, especially if their metabolic response is perturbed, and understanding what might be the underlying reason why their metabolic response is perturbed. So probably OGTT, but CGM's pretty close if you know how to interpret it. And the benefit there, of course, aside from getting more continuous data, is you can do it at home, right? A1C and fasting glucose, I honestly, I become less interested in, because you get a lot of misinformation just from fasting glucose and A1C.
Yep, I've noticed that firsthand.
I think if you're going to do fasting glucose, though, you always should pair it with insulin.
Fasting insulin. Is that normal for primary care, or is that?
Probably not in most. Some do, but probably not most, yeah.
Okay, so for his fifth category, he kind of cheated and just said a metabolic panel, which includes liver and renal function. So CMP.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can't argue with that. I think especially nowadays where fatty liver is much more common, knowing whether your liver function is perturbed based on blood-based biomarkers makes sense. I guess you could ask the question, if you got a really solid body composition analysis and acted on that, would that catch most of the overt liver disease that you would see on a blood panel, and give you additional information about, muscle mass, bone density? So I can't argue with that. I think I would. I don't know that I feel strongly about this, but I'd probably, if I had to pick, I'd probably favor regular DEXAs over the liver kidney biomarkers, but I might change my mind next week. So I don't feel strongly about that.
I don't know if this is an answerable question, but do you prefer sort of metabolic biomarkers or functional biomarkers in terms of like what kind of excites you more to learn about or to pay attention to?
I think it totally depends on context, right? Okay. And what you're looking for. So I would say in general, I think functional biomarkers are more likely to be relevant for quality of life, which is what most people care about. However, I think many of these molecular markers that you can detect from blood chemistry will tell you more about overt disease. And when you have overt disease, the response usually needs to be, much faster, much more acute sort of response to take care of that problem before it develops further or kills you, right? And I think most of the blood tests in general are built to detect overt disease. And so it really depends on what the context is. Think you want both.
So what are some developments in longevity research this past year or so that you've been kind of excited about?
I think one of the things that I have found sort of interesting is the idea that, and it's not surprising, but I think the idea that we can actually get pretty comprehensive assessments of what people are calling organ age from a single blood test, right? And people have done this with epigenetics, they've done it with metabolites, they've done it with proteomics. So, and what I mean by that is you can, from a single blood test, get what appear to be reasonably good assessments of organ function in a bunch of different tissues and organs. So brain, heart, liver, kidney. So it's kind of like what we were talking about, from the basic blood panel. You have kidney markers, you have liver markers, you have heart, cardiovascular markers. So now we're getting to the place where we can get much more, I think, comprehensive and quantitative assessments of how these organs are functioning individually and together from a single test. It's not yet ready for, clinical or consumer use, in my opinion, even though some of these direct-to-consumer companies are marketing these things as if they are, at least in the methylation space. But I think it will get there. And I think these are going to be really useful both for personalized approaches to health optimization, because we can detect in each individual where things are working really well, which systems are functioning close to optimally and which are perturbed, and then create targeted interventions to assess that. So I'm excited to see where that goes. And I think there's a lot of promise there. I'm not yet sold on which of the different modalities that we can measure is going to be most informative. Again, meaning like methylation, metabolome, proteome, transcriptome, right? There are lots of different ways you can look at that. So that to me has been pretty interesting and exciting.
So his first one, we can kind of go back and forth. His first one was just leveraging AI, I think, in terms of like to help potentially improve the healthcare system. And
yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Like, I think I like his answer better than mine in this case. I mean, I think there are a few different places where AI could be really powerful going forward. So I think what you just said, kind of accelerating and expanding quality healthcare to populations that have been underserved. So I think AI can have an impact on healthcare at every sort of part of the socioeconomic spectrum. But I think where it really has a lot of promise is at expanding a reasonable quality of care to underserved populations, because I think so much of the interpretation AI can do as well. And in some cases, we're learning better than human physicians. And that's not a knock against human physicians. It's just the reality of what the data is showing us. And it costs essentially nothing. So you've got a really expensive human physician versus an AI algorithm that essentially costs nothing, that performs as well and maybe in some cases better. There are real opportunities there to have an impact in terms of health equity. Now, lots of things have to happen before we're going to get there, including people are going to have to trust that the AI algorithms are working, and we're going to have to show that they're working. But I think we'll get there. So I think that's a really powerful thing that will happen. And I don't know if it's going to happen in 5 years or 10 years. I think it's going to happen. Related to that is this idea of AI agents. As you know, at Optispan, we think a lot about AI health span agents, and can everybody have sort of, Optispan level recommendations, healthcare personalized to them on their personal device. That will happen. Again, don't know if it's going to be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. That will happen, and it's coming. So I think that those are two places. And then in the sort of longevity, more pure longevity space, AI has the potential, obviously, to help decode the biological complexity of aging. Aging is probably it is one of the most biologically complex things that you could try to study. And so I think that's where AI excels. And in intervention discovery, predicting which interventions are likely to have a larger impact on longevity. And I know I've said this before, I'll say it again. I think there is a misperception, however, that AI is going to kind of solve aging. And I think the misperception comes because most people don't understand how little we actually understand biological aging and how few interventions have actually been tested. AI is only as good as the training set. And if your training set is shit, your outcome is going to be shit. And right now, our training set for interventions for longevity is shit. So unless we fix that problem, AI is handicapped in what it can actually do. So I think two things need to happen. We need to greatly expand our understanding of biological aging, and in particular, the just raw number of interventions that we've tested for longevity, so that we can actually use that as a useful training set, and AI can actually predict which interventions are going to do even better.
Yeah, that's really informative. Do you have any other further research that you're excited about? Or I think I have one for you.
Yeah, go for it.
GLP-1 agonist?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting. So yes, certainly from a clinical utility perspective, GLP-1 agonists are probably the most exciting development in the last 5 years in terms of potential for one drug or one class of drugs to have an outsized impact on human health. Interesting question, whether they directly modulate biological aging. And if they do, which I believe they probably do, to me, the question is, do they modulate biological aging solely through a caloric restriction effect, or also through other mechanisms independent of caloric consumption? And I'll just say, I don't know the answer to that. When people were first asking this question, I was, very much of the opinion, loosely held, that it was all caloric restriction. And I've sort of changed my thoughts. I think there's a pretty good chance that these drugs have caloric independent effects on biological aging. So super interested in that. And I think there are many opportunities for appropriate use of GLP-1 agonists in the context of an overall health optimization plan for some people, not for everyone, for sure. And again, I don't want to give the impression that I'm all like GLP-1 agonists are going to change the world. There's a lot of challenges and a lot of risks that are still not, in my view, appropriately recognized or taken into the calculation when these drugs are used for many people. So I think we need to have a better understanding, or at least a larger fraction of the medical community needs to have a better understanding and appreciation of the downsides of these drugs. But I think there are ways to use them in a more comprehensive protocol that where you can mitigate some of the risks. And by risks, I think, mostly I'm thinking of loss of lean mass, loss of bone density, potentially much greater risks of frailty over time, and the sort of yo-yo effect that happens when you come off of them, where many people regain the weight, but when they lose the weight, it's roughly half lean mass. When they regain the weight, it's roughly no lean mass. So you actually end up in a worse place than you started often. So I think appreciating those risks and taking that into account in a sort of overall approach to using those drugs needs to happen. But I do think there's a lot of potential value to the GLP-1 agonists.
All right, great. So his second one, if I remember, was IL-11 inhibitors.
So that to me wasn't as exciting as I think a lot of people got excited by, mostly because the evidence so far seems pretty clear. That's all through mTOR. So it's another way to target the mTOR pathway, which we have already known from, hundreds of studies over the last 20 years is kind of a key node in the longevity network. So are these potential drugs likely to be better than other ways of targeting mTOR? Maybe, maybe not. But it's not, at least to my mind, a fundamentally new class, a fundamentally new mechanism for modulating aging. Again, I'm going to say that's my opinion now. It's a little bit more tightly held than the GLP-1 agonist initial opinion, but it could be the case that inhibiting IL-11 has effects that are independent of mTOR. So far, I haven't seen any data to suggest that's the case.
So obviously, you're a geroscientist. He's an MD. Is there times you feel like he might not fully understand aspects of geroscientists in you not fully understanding?
Of course. Well, sure, of course. And again, that's not meant to be a criticism. We've all got our background expertise and we all have different information. And I'm absolutely sure there are times when Peter will be right about geroscience and I'll be wrong. I don't know if there are times when I'll be right about clinical medicine and he'll be wrong, but I think, of course, the way you're going to view a new discovery is through the lens of what you already know.
Yeah.
Right.
I didn't word that great, but even just before I worked here, before I met you, I watched both of you guys separately. And the combination, like the episodes you guys were together, I thought were really informative because of your unique, different backgrounds of approaching the same problems.
Yeah.
Through different, backgrounds.
Right.
All right. So his last one of developments was, Klotho as a neuroprotective drug.
Oh, yeah. So, right. So I've seen Peter's episode with Dina Dubal. Dina's fantastic, by the way. Ton of respect for her and her research. Klotho is interesting. I guess I didn't think of it in this context because to me, it's not new. Like people in the field have been studying Klotho for 20 plus years. So we've known about this hormone that can affect aging and multiple age-related health outcomes, as well as lifespan in mice. Including cognitive function, but it's not restricted to cognitive function. So I just didn't put it in the bucket of new, but really exciting stuff. I think it's got a lot of potential. The non-human primate data is pretty compelling. Again, I think I've made it sort of a joke, but not really. Like if I was going to do an experimental gene therapy that was completely untested in humans, I certainly wouldn't pick follistatin. I'd probably pick Klotho. So I think it's got a lot of potential. We don't know yet, but the combination of preclinical data and then human genetic variants is pretty compelling to me. So I think there's a lot of opportunity by targeting Klotho and the pathway that is downstream of Klotho to have certainly an impact on cognitive function and dementia, but maybe aging more broadly.
All right. So the flip side, is there anything you've recently changed your mind on in terms of the longevity research in this field?
I don't know if I've really changed my mind. I think I've become certainly more pessimistic about direct to consumer biological age tests. And we've talked about this on the podcast, but my feeling is that right now, as standalone measurements of health prediction, definitely as standalone measurements of biological age, the direct-to-consumer biological age tests are essentially completely useless. So, and I know that's very strong, but that's where I'm at right now.
Mhm.
And I really think the industry needs to get their act together and clean it up because it's a mess. Having said that, I think also one of the things that I am thinking a lot about is so if we take out the fact that with the direct-to-consumer tests, there's so much noise that it's hard to know what's real and what's not, and just look at the research data, I think we are starting to have a lot of evidence that at least the methylation patterns that people correlate with health outcomes that they call biological age are much more dynamic. And what I mean by that is they seem to go up and down much more rapidly than you would expect, given the sort of traditional view of biological aging as a process that occurs through life with sort of an exponential kinetics, meaning it's kind of slow early in life, and then the aging process, or at least mortality risk, picks up. So it's got like a hockey stick shape once you get into 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? Exponential increase in mortality. That's the way we've thought about biological aging before, right? Damage accumulation that increases exponentially with age, causing your risk of dying to increase exponentially with age. If in fact it's going up and down throughout life, that's a very different model for biological aging. So if these tests are actually measuring something fundamental, maybe not all of biological aging, but a part of biological aging, and they're very dynamic, I think that we need to reframe the way we're thinking about what biological aging is, both from a mathematical perspective and potentially a molecular perspective. And so I don't want to get too far in the weeds on that, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot. I'm certainly not the only person thinking about it. In fact, there's a conference that I'm going to go to in Singapore next year, on this topic. So I think it's like around the physics and mathematics of biological aging and what does it mean. So I think there's something that we haven't previously appreciated about the biological aging process that these tests are telling us, and in particular, the fact that they bounce around so much, even once we take out the variation from sample processing and things like that, you still get a lot of dynamic changes, which is really interesting. And so it's changed the way I've thought kind of more fundamentally about biological aging. But it's also at a place where I kind of feel like there's something there, but I don't know what it means yet.
Okay, so that's partly why we still use them at Optispan.
Well, and also, what I've said is the direct-to-consumer biological age tests on their own are, I think I said, completely useless. Again, maybe that was an overstatement, but I can't actually think of a way I would use them other than for entertainment value. And honestly, I'm not very entertained at this point. So, but I do think in the context of a sort of comprehensive health assessment, they can potentially be useful. I think part of the reason we're using them is because we're not only measuring methylation, right? We're measuring 3 different modalities of biological aging directly, and over time, hope to learn which modalities of biological aging are most strongly associated with other things that we believe are important. Functional measures, more traditional blood-based biomarkers, things like that. So I think in the context of a larger data set, there is potentially some value. And I would also say one of the biological age tests we use is not direct to consumer, right? In other words, you can't get access to it. In fact, most physicians can't get access to it right now. So I think it's a different model when we're talking about the stuff that is completely unregulated, that is being sold through the internet without any quality controls, versus putting it in the context of an overall health optimization program.
All right. So one thing he changed his mind on, since he's actually written Outlive, is that he thinks there should be a 5th horseman, which is immune function. Any thoughts on that?
Well, sorry, Peter. I'm not a big fan of the 4 horseman model to begin with, because I think that's the siloed reactive approach. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I think it's more useful to think of how the underlying biological system is functioning or not functioning that then leads to cancer, heart disease, right? The individual diseases of aging. And I think immune function is, first of all, dysregulation of the immune system is one of the hallmarks of aging. In many ways, dysregulation of the immune system ties together many of the diseases of aging. So I don't think it fits well into this horseman model that these are 5 independent or 4 independent things that are happening. Dysregulation of the immune system certainly contributes to and may be the primary driver of cardiovascular disease, increased cancer risk. I think we're learning the importance of chronic inflammation and dysregulation of immune function in cognitive dysfunction. So, inflammaging or chronic inflammation is I would argue, causal factor for the 4 horsemen and many other important age-related diseases. So I wouldn't put it in that category. I'm not diminishing the importance of it. I just don't like that sort of categorization scheme.
All right, so I think that wraps up all the things I wanted to ask you from Peter's AMA.
Okay.
He mentioned on a previous podcast, so I think with Chris Williamson, that Chris asked him his top 10 exercises, if you could only do 10 more for the rest of his life type question. So I wanted to ask you the same. So this is for, working out. What are your top 10 exercises?
Okay. Yeah, actually, I think this will be pretty easy. Like, I mean, again, I don't know about the rest of my life. Hopefully I can do them for the rest of my life. But like, I really prioritize, again, I've talked about it, resistance training, I think should be a part of everybody's routine. So it's going to be different for different people, what you want to do. I really like weightlifting and I like compound exercises. Mm-hmm. So I would say we talked about pull-ups. Pull-ups are on the list for sure. Bench press, shoulder press, squats, deadlift. That's kind of my go-to for weightlifting. The things I would put, that's 6, I think.
6, okay.
Yeah, pull-ups, bench press, shoulder press, squats, deadlifts. I guess that's 5.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, do I do, triceps and curls sometimes, but I don't think I would put that in like the essential bucket. So 5 cardio. I don't even need 5 resistance training. I don't even need 5 cardio, right? I think like hiking, I would put up there on the list for sure. Get outside. I like stairs. I think stairs are really useful. I personally find them useful for like interval training. That's like the only thing that I ever do. I don't train for VO2 max, but like that's the only thing I ever do that could even be considered like training for VO2 max sort of exercise. So I would put stairs, some sort of stairs, whether it's outside or a stair stepper. And I like elliptical just as like keep me in kind of zone 2 area. I can do it for half an hour, an hour. That's probably enough. Like that's 8.
Yeah, you answered that.
You're good.
You got 2 free ones that you can give to Peter.
Yeah, I think Peter, you can have 2 of my exercises.
As a personal trainer, like my clients who I train once a week, it's actually really easy to train because there's really 7 high-level movements you can do. So like vertical push, vertical pull, horizontal push, horizontal pull, lunge, squat. You can go on. So there's about 7 main movement patterns. And so during our hours, make sure we at least do a movement for each one. And you could pick, do you want to do bench press today, dumbbell bench, a machine? It's all the same. So I'd probably do the same thing if I was answering this question, and then add 3 for cardio. 3 cardio modalities.
Yeah. So what are the 7 that you have for muscle training?
Let's see if I remember off the top of my head. So there's vertical push, would be like overhead
shoulder press. Yeah.
Shoulder press. There'd be horizontal push, like a bench press or push up. There would be vertical pull, it's like a pull up.
Pull up. Yeah.
Horizontal pull, like a row, seated row, chest to bar row, dumbbell row.
Do you think you need both the vertical pull and the horizontal pull?
They hit slightly different muscles. Like I would do both.
Yeah.
But that's one way I think about it. So if they did pull-ups, then maybe we'll do seated row, as opposed to doing pull-ups and then lat pull down.
Sure.
Would be kind of redundant.
Yeah.
There's a lunge, like a split squat type movement. There's just a traditional squat.
Yeah.
And what am I missing? How many is that?
6.
6. There might be one more I'm missing. I'm sure, you can think about there's like the sagittal, transverse, frontal plane. I'm sure I'm missing.
Yeah. Again,
something.
I think that's totally a good approach.
Oh,
right?
hinge, hip hinge, like a straight leg deadlift. That's the one I was missing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't mess with straight leg deadlift anymore.
Yeah. You hurt your back?
Yeah. I don't know if I've actually injured my back. I have back pain after I do straight leg deadlift.
Yeah.
So, I think there's levels of like what gets you closer to optimal. But I think kind of we're both, I think, more or less saying the same thing. There are kind of fundamental movements that are important. And if you hit them, you can get most of what you need. May not be optimal, but it gets you pretty close and it's pretty simple don't have to think a lot.
Yeah. And if you're doing pull-up rows and if you're doing lunges with dumbbells, you're getting grip strength, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, right.
That's it.
Right. And I mean, again, I think one of the things that people get scared off by these compound movements for a variety of reasons, but, there have been studies even showing in elderly people, if you just stick with, a few compound movements straight, like 5x5 workout, right? So 5 reps of 5. Mm-hmm. Elderly people get significant muscle gain just from that, right? Mm-hmm. So it works. And so I think, if you are one of those people who has anxiety about bench press or whatever, I think trying to figure out a way to get over that anxiety. And again, there are a variety of reasons. Like I've made a lot of mistakes in my weightlifting life, young and dumb, trying to lift too much weight, terrible form, right? Yeah. I think if you go in, get a good trainer who can actually help you do it right, do the movements with good form, take it slow, don't worry about the weight. If you just get on a program and stick to it, even if it's just a basic 5x5, you're gonna see positive improvements in your body composition. Mm-hmm. And your risk of injury, maybe 5x5 isn't great for everyone because I think the risk of injury goes up a little bit as you get higher in weight. Again, that can be mitigated by good form. So there's lots of moving parts there. But I think the likelihood of injury, if you have a good trainer who teaches you how to do the form right, and you really don't worry about weight and just focus on doing the exercises well, is pretty low, and you're going to see gains.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think it's the Lift More study. Is that the one you're referring to with the older people? Yeah, still gain muscle. For sure. Yeah, I love 8 to 12 rep range. It's kind of a good place to start. Hit every muscle once or twice a week. I mean, I wouldn't push it to failure, especially when you're newer.
Right. No, definitely, yeah.
The downside of being injured, the time off, will hurt you more than any progress you made by training harder.
Right.
So you might as well go 80% for decades than 100% for a week.
But again, I think we don't want to minimize the find what works for you part too, right? Again, maybe that's not going to work for everyone. I think it could work for a lot of people who just have decided mentally in their own head that they can't do, weightlifting. Mm-hmm. But certainly you've got to find something that you can stick with. And the same thing's true for cardio. Like I said, like those things work for me, might not work for somebody else, might not, like hiking may not be an option if you live in the middle of Beijing, right? So I think you have to find the type of cardiovascular exercise as well that you can do in the context of your own life that works for you.
It's hard for me to relate when someone goes like, I don't like weightlifting, because I think maybe genetically or just predisposition to love doing it. I've been doing it since I was 12. And then I'm also fortunate that I like cardio and lifting equally. So again, I kind of do half my week's cardio, half weightlifting. Do you find that like it's like when someone says they don't like chocolate, like I can't relate to them?
Yeah. And yet you recognize there are things that you don't like that other people do. Yeah.
That's fair.
No, I totally get it. I tend to feel the same way, which is why I'm trying hard, not to go too far down that path and say everybody should do this. Yes, I do find it hard to relate to people who also say I hate weightlifting, and I can't help but wonder, where that comes from. Most of the time, and I've asked quite a few people who have said something like that to me. Where does that come from? And tried to figure it out. Most of the time, it's not from a place of actually learning how to lift weights properly and really trying to get into it. It's some preconceived notion based on gym class from 5th grade or something, right?
I see.
But I have met a couple of people who were athletes in college, lifted weights a lot, and just don't like going to the gym and lifting weights.
Yeah,
whatever. Do body weight exercise. Do whatever works for you. So there are people who really, for whatever reason, they just have gotten to a place where it's not fun for them. They don't enjoy it. And
yeah, I mean, I was a competitive powerlifter for 10 years at Strongman, and then I did a full year of just rings, and it was so refreshing because you can just kind of find a new vertical or pivot. There's always, I think, something.
Yeah. But I think you can, even like running, right? There are people who love running.
Yeah.
I never have loved running. I got to the point where I kind of like the first couple of miles. I thought I would train for a marathon, and I got up to where I would do like 10, 12 miles, and I realized as soon as I got over 10, it was like, I want to be anywhere but here.
Yeah, where other people love it, they get addicted.
Yeah. So again, there is a very individual sort of component to exercise, just like every other aspect of life.
All right, so that was everything from the Peter's AMA, again, episode 329 for people who are interested.
So did we disagree fundamentally on anything?
I mean, nothing, I would say minor, nothing like huge. Yeah.
Okay, we'll find something. We'll find something that Peter and I disagree about, and maybe I can ask him about it when we film for our podcast.
I would say actually to the biggest thing is probably the Four Horsemen. I didn't know that you
Yeah.
aren't as aligned.
Yeah, that's true,
there.
because that's one of his sort of
It's big
foundations.
pillars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I don't think it's wrong. I just don't like that framework because I think it misses the point of the biological interconnectedness of the systems that really drive those individual diseases.
I see.
And I think from a framework of talking to the general public, it's probably a useful way to present it because people are used to thinking about diseases, but they're tied together in a fundamental way. And it's really largely the biology of aging that drives that connection.
Yep, and the other minor one would be you're probably not as excited about IL-11 as he is.
That's true. Well, I don't know how excited he is, but yeah, I didn't put it, certainly wouldn't put it like in my top 5 list of biggest discoveries in the field in the last 5 years or year even.
Great. Well, that was fun. That was probably longer than we expected, like usual.
Yeah. So we'll see. Peter probably won't watch this, but if you are watching, Peter, and I said anything that pissed you off, let's go at it in January.
If he is watching this, he's probably on a bike right now, listening to it.
Yeah. All right. That was fun. Total respect for Peter Attia, by the way, if you guys didn't know. Friend of mine, and I think one of the, certainly in my view, one of the voices that I pay the most attention to. So again, we don't agree on everything, but he's certainly one of the most thoughtful people in this space, in my opinion.
Yep. I'm looking forward to meeting him next month.
All right. Thanks for watching, guys. As always, any comments or questions, please leave them below. If you're not yet a subscriber, hit the subscribe button, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the Optispan podcast.